Hello, thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Shannon Gale, I'm the station manager at GCTV, and tonight we're going to be talking about filming public events. And this particular talk is great for anybody who is either thinking of filming a public event as a videographer, or for anybody that is really more of an event planner and needs to take into consideration the logistics of having their event filmed because they're going to go out and need to actually talk to a videographer about having their event filmed. So, you know, this talk is really more logistics than tech, although we'll get into a little bit of the equipment considerations. When you're thinking about having an event filmed, the first thing that you need to do is get permission to film the event. Because, and there's a couple places that you need to start. Is one, you want to talk to the venue that the event is held in to make sure that it's okay to bring your camera equipment in and film. And your production will always go a lot better if you have their cooperation anyway, in terms of getting your mics and your cameras placed properly and things like that. But you also want to double check with the venue and perhaps directly with the presenter themselves, because you want to make sure that the presenter gives their permission to being filmed as well. Just because they said it, that agreed to speak to an audience in public, doesn't mean that they gave consent to have themselves filmed. And they may want to have more interaction with you or the videographer if you are filming, to get maybe some final input about what the project looks like when it goes, you know, to whatever destination it's intended for. So the first thing you got to do is go out and get the proper permissions. Once that's settled, there's a bunch of different questions that you want to ask beforehand, which is just going to make the project go a lot more smoothly and better prepare you going forward. First thing is you want to ask, how many speakers will there be at the event? And if it's more than one speaker, how are those speakers going to be presented? If they're going to be a speaker coming up one at a time to a podium, that's going to be a lot easier to mic than if they're in a panel. But if they're seated in a panel, you're going to have to take into consideration microphones. How many you're going to need, if it's depending on the type of mic you're using. If it's an omnidirectional microphone, you can usually get one microphone per two people, sometimes three if you have enough speakers and you've got somebody in a corner on a table. You can usually set up one microphone for three people. And then the other thing that you want to take into account is there going to be a lot of people walking around during the presentation? Because if you're going to have a lot of people in movement, then you might want to watch how many wires you run for those particular microphones. You also want to consider questions from the audience. Usually when people film public events, you know, especially if it's in a big room, it can be a little difficult to plan to mic questions from the audience. If the plan is that the audience members are going to come up to the podium and speak directly into a microphone, that's a little bit easier to deal with. It's the kind of thing where they're allowed to just stand up in the room and ask their question. Your camera, your microphone may not pick that up, and so a conversation to have ahead of time is to speak to the moderator of the program or somebody on the panel who will make the point of repeating the question into their microphone, so that way during editing it's easier to then make a graphic, maybe cut out the audience member, but make a graphic that shows what the question was that's being answered, and nobody's left guessing. The next thing you want to find out is position of your equipment. You want to talk to the people who are running the event and let them know what is best for you as the videographer to have your gear be placed. Most of the stuff that we've done at GCTV and most of the stuff that our volunteers have done have been one camera shoots. So ideally you want to get right in the center of the activity. You don't want to be off to the side or too far off to the side, because then you're only going to get a profile shot of the action. You want to be right in the center, and especially if there's a panel, you want to be in the center so that way you can pan back and forth from one speaker to the other or go out and do a wide shot. If it's a situation where you have a panel and a podium, again, it's going to give you better range of motion to get all the action that's going on. Also, if the situation does not allow you to run multiple microphones with the wires and you're using a shotgun mic like Al is, it will allow, with the shotgun mic's going to pick up directly what's in front of it, so as you pan to each speaker, you're going to have a better shot at getting the audio, rather than if you have your panel off to this side and your camera's way off to this side, you're at a much further distance, your audio won't come out as well. You want to take into account lighting. In particular, if the presentation or the event that you're filming, and again, most of what we've dealt with has been more presentations rather than events like dances or weddings or things like that. If they're going to give a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, and the lights are going to be out, it's important again that your camera be right in the center of the action so you can zoom in on the screen full shot, because once they turn out the lights, the screen is the only thing your camera is going to see. You're not going to get the speaker or anything like that unless you're in a situation where that speaker is well off to the side and lit separately, and that almost never happens in most public events that we've been involved in. So you want to keep that in mind too, and also make sure that there's going to be somebody who will turn the lights back on once. That doesn't always happen. I mean, sometimes the lights go out, and even when the PowerPoint presentation is done, the lights don't always get turned back on fully, and you're not going to leave your camera to do it, so you want to talk to somebody ahead of time and make sure that somebody else is going to be there to turn the lights on and off when appropriate. If it is a PowerPoint presentation and you're in a position where you can do some editing, you might want to talk to the presenters and see if they would be willing to forward their PowerPoint slides, because those can all be converted to JPEG, which is a standard photo file, and then you can drop in those slides over your video layer, which is actually going to look better than the camera on a screen in the event. But it becomes important to still keep your camera on that screen in the event, because that becomes your guide for dropping in the slides. That a lot of the times, if somebody's doing a PowerPoint presentation, they're going to turn off the lights, and you're going to focus your camera, you're going to zoom in your camera so that way the screen that the PowerPoint presentation is on fills the screen. And that's going to look a lot better than just zooming out and trying to get the actual presenters who are speaking. But I also made the comment that whenever possible, you want to talk to the presenters about seeing if they'll send over their PowerPoint presentation, so that way you can drop the digital file in to replace what you did on video. And that's often because a lot of the times, what happens on screen, the screens are going to be a lot brighter, a lot hotter on camera than filming actual people. And so the color is going to be distorted. Things are going to kind of bleed into each other and stuff like that. It's not going to be the best presentation. It's better than nothing to keep the presentation in there and go full screen and film it the best that you can on video, but it's not going to look as good as if you're able to then get the files from the presenter and drop it in as a digital image. It's going to be a much cleaner image, a much cleaner look, and you can still drop it in and keep the audio that's in place. But in general, it's just going to look a lot better than having had your camera on the screen filming it that way. You also want to make sure that you know how much time you have to set up. We've worked events where one event is getting out and we only have a half hour before we have to hit record on the event that we're filming. So that will go into, again, how much camera equipment can you bring. It's pretty easy to set up a single camera and a couple of microphones, but if you're in a situation where you're asked to do multiple cameras, you're going to have multiple people that you have to accommodate, then that's going to take you a little longer to set up, and you're going to want to coordinate with those camera people ahead of time as to who's going to stay on the wide shot, who's going to get certain close-ups, so that way you don't run into a situation in editing where you've got all the same shot, or all the same shot and they're both bad because they all zoomed in on something that and didn't get any wide shots or anything like that. You want to ask, and this is a question that's come up a couple times with topics of a sensitive nature, especially where the presenters do want to have, especially where the presenters do want to have questions from the audience, is they're afraid that if the event is filmed, it's going to dilute the effectiveness of the event or the presentation, because people will be too afraid to even have their voice on camera asking certain questions depending on what the nature of the topic is. So sometimes they've decided not to film an event because of that. And so that might be a point of negotiation where you either maybe some workarounds, if the person really still wants to have it filmed but they want to make sure that people are comfortable asking questions, is that instead of having them raise their hand or stand up and ask the question, you can pass around index cards and have them write anonymous questions that then there's somebody there that kind of filters them during the talk, and then brings those questions to the speakers to ask out loud without attribution, but to essentially answer the questions coming from the audience without making anybody feel uncomfortable. So those are some of the things in general to consider when filming public events. It's also a good idea to let people know up front that the event is being filmed, just in case, again, somebody does have an issue with it. Somebody who was planning to speak may decide not to speak, that sort of thing. It's just, the idea of informed consent. But, those are some of the logistics to keep in mind, either as the videographer doing the event, or somebody who's planning to have their event filmed and going to be talking to the videographer. Those are the things that you're going to want to keep in mind. Part of the things that you want to consider with lighting is, a lot of videographers, especially if they're volunteer and they haven't done this a lot, they're going to want to put things on automatic for exposure, which is how much light is let into the camera and how bright or dark your picture ends up looking. And a lot of the times automatic does a pretty decent job for the most part. But if you have, if you have somebody in a spotlight situation at a podium, or the lighting is going to keep changing, frequently because they're turning lights on and off, or they have they have somebody on the podium with a spotlight and then they're going to have the projector going, which adds a whole other light source to it. At some point, automatic for lighting may not do the job. And so if you're a more experienced videographer, or even if you're not and you have the time to look into it and get some instruction, either come down to GCTV or there's tons of tutorials online, you're going to want to get to know the manual settings of your camera, both for focus and for exposure. So that way you can adjust the lighting as you see fit for the circumstance. Because when you leave something on automatic and your room lighting changes frequently from light to dark, you're actually going to see the camera changing the lighting situation automatically, and that's going to come out in recording. And you're never going to be able to really fix that well in editing, because it's just going to keep changing it on its own, because it's trying to find the perfect situation, and it just can't. So it really needs somebody to take control, take it off of automatic, and set it manually. Another thing to consider is white balancing on the camera. So white balancing, have you ever seen a photo, or even a video for that matter, that looks like it has either a blue or orange cast to it? So that's something that was not white balanced properly. And white balancing is the thing, it kind of sets, it's a function that sets the white point in a picture, and so all the other colors fall into place. And like with focus and exposure, a lot of cameras have automatic white balance. Sometimes it does a good job, sometimes not so much. In fact, I've found that in general, white balance is one of the few things cameras don't handle very well automatically. And so that's another thing that you want to find out, if the camera you're using has the function to do it manually. And so when you set it to manual white balance, what you have to do is wherever your subject is, okay, so in white balancing me, your camera's going to be where your camera is, and you're going to have your subject hold up at least a white piece of paper, or if they happen to have a whiteboard near them, so long as it's in the same distance, the proximity between subject and camera, you're going to, the camera person's then going to zoom in on a pure white item, and just bring a piece of paper with you. And they're going to then set the manual white balance function, and then everything in the colors should fall into place pretty well. The only time that might not work out is, I don't know, I don't know how that might change a little bit, where you white balanced for one lighting situation, like with the lights on, and then they turn off the lights and they do the PowerPoint presentation. You probably aren't going to have an opportunity to re-white balance in that situation. But again, hopefully you're able to get, hopefully you're able to get the presentation slides, and it really won't matter, because that's just going to be your guide for dropping in the digital files. Thank you for coming, and if any questions come up after the fact, please feel free to call me or contact me at GCTV. Our website's guilfordtv.org.